I'm a faculty member also in the ITOM department. And when I was asked to participate in this panel today, I thought, okay, so what am I doing in the AI space and what's interesting to me? And so right now there are two projects that sort of touch on AI. One is that I'm actually wanting to look at sort of the ethics, the ethical implications of using AI in hiring. Because this is a really big area for AI that companies are using. And again, this is real, we've got to prepare our students, for these kinds of realities. And so I'm thinking about writing a case study, teaching case, to essentially, bring some of these questions to bear on, how do we evaluate these technologies that are being used currently to select people, to make ideally better selections, right? But there's potentially some hidden issues in the background, right? So getting the students to engage with that is something that I wanted to do. And the other project that I'm currently doing is with a company called Egon Zehnder, a company that is doing sort of leadership search, right? So very exclusive leadership search. And the people that they're looking for in companies are exactly the kind of people who can lead the next generation, of digital strategy, right? And sort of AI strategy. And so basically, for me, this is a great partnership in terms of, what are they looking for? What are they finding in terms of who, what kind of talent they're drawing? So it's really a question of, how do we prepare for a future, yes, where we will have to partner with AI. Right, so I think this has huge implications for, what we teach our students, what we tell our kids, in terms of the kinds of things they should learn and potentially invest themselves in. So these are sort of the questions that I've been working with, playing with, if you want. And so again, I'm not going to go into this because Amit's already given us a sort of definition of AI. But to me, this is sort of the AI space, right? If I were to say, okay, so, what's this convergence of stuff, right, that makes up what we generally put under the umbrella of AI, right? It's sort of the analytics, the intelligent agents, so, the self-driving cars, as well as sort of robots, right? Sort of coming together in this convergence that is continuously learning and where the machine is continuously essentially taking in additional data, enhancing its algorithms, enhancing, its knowledge base, to the model that Amit was talking about. So to me, this is sort of how I think of this space. So jumping right in. So what is happening? How are people using AI in hiring? So if you've read the book by Cathy O'Neill, Weapons of Math Destruction, right? Very sort of evocative title. She tells an interesting story of a student who basically had done, a couple of years at Vanderbilt, has, great SAT scores and so on, and then wants to get a minimum wage job at, a Kroger's. And what's, increasingly these companies, especially in the retail space, are doing is they have this personality test based on Cronus. So the company is Cronus, and there's a personality test. And essentially, he applies for the first job, flunks out based on the test. Second, third, fourth. So basically, he goes to 7 different companies, always with the same test. Always, he basically gets red flagged. Right? And so, so then the question is, okay, so is this progress if we have, minimum wage job not being available to somebody who, essentially is halfway through a college degree and has perfect SAT? So where's this going, right? And, might say, oh, well, just figure out how to cheat the test, right? Or sort of know what they're looking for. Well, the questions are really quite tricky if you look at these, right? What would you decide? And especially, if sort of your options, your opportunities were denied as a result. Then, of course, similarly, people are using, another product called Skill Survey, where, it's all about figuring out, predicting turnover and performance, right? And so, of course, it's, behavioral science questions that then get enhanced potentially, right, through, the performance of people who have essentially taken those tests. And so this is the self-learning, right, sort of the learning algorithm that ultimately, will get better over time and make better predictions is the idea. Other, technologies are looking at, social media. and trying to predict, in this instance, job hopping, right? And so again, there are questions of how good are those technologies? Are they really indicative of, this negative association of job hopping, or is there something else going on, right? Sort of how fine-tuned are they? So I think questions around that are certainly, in order. Another set of technologies, so simulating the first day at work and then predicting whether somebody fits your company's culture based on profiles that you've created, right? And so essentially you'd be doing this kind of simulation. Higher view, I think, is really interesting and essentially used by Unilever. And so this is essentially looking at, basically getting people to answer a certain series of questions and video recording themselves, sending that video recording in. That video recording is then viewed through AI technology and essentially using things like facial recognitions, word choice, gestures, voice inflections to essentially get a sense of, would you fit this company? And here's some of the, I think, maybe unsettling aspects of doing something like this. We also see this kind of technology being used to determine whether somebody's sexual orientation, right? So we've heard of those, applications of such technology. Now, whether they do that in this instance, not clear, but, that's another way in which this kind of technology gets used. Another one is to determine depression. Right? So based on the words that you use and so on, right, you get sort of categorized in terms of a range of depression. I just hope that somebody figures out jobs where depression is actually a plus, right? So essentially, but you can see where this potentially could go. Now, of course, Unilever is saying, we want a more diverse workforce, therefore we need to get more applicants, more diverse applicants. Well, if we do that, then we need more efficient ways to we sort of, basically determine who would be the best applicant, right? So all of this with an eye to, we want a larger set, and we don't want to look at them through the roster of how we've always looked at them, namely, things like, which university did you go to, and sort of some very potentially crude measures, right? Here you've got tons and tons of little measures, right, that essentially are supposed to give you insights. Then another technology also used by Unilever, Pymetrics, which I think is interesting. It's one of the challenges in hiring is figuring out, what kind of skills are you looking for? What kind of traits are you looking for? What has made people in your organization successful in the past, right? And so how do you figure that out? And so one of the opportunity that's being used here is games. Right, so using games and figuring out traits based, the traits of your very successful employees in certain job categories, right? And then you have your candidates play the same games and match based on matches between sort of the ways you play the game, right? Is how you then identify potential candidates. And so Pymetrics sort of sells itself on the slogan of throw the resume away. Right, because essentially it's an idealized version of certain sort of very broad categories of knowledge and skill, right, that really don't necessarily work all that well, right? So I think certainly an interesting application there. Okay, so here's some general concerns, that people bring up with this AI technology that I think we need to sort of at least be aware of when we're looking at these potential applications, right? So a key concern is always bias, right? So how sort of realistic, right? How real, how accurate, right, are these results that we're getting? Because this AI technology, the predictions are based on data a lot of the times, right? And so how good is that data? How biased is that data, right? The algorithm is only as good as the bias that's been built into it, or the data, the bias in the data. So, sampling strategies and so on and so forth. So even in Pymetrics, right, if you have, so one thing in Pymetrics that you lose completely is teamwork, right? That there's sort of an effect of a team because we're looking only at the individual skills, right? So there's certain things that certainly get left out, even in technologies that really try to, break the constraints, right? That we typically use in this practice of hiring, for example. Of course, key concerns with algorithms is that they're so complex, no human being or group of human beings can essentially unpack them and investigate them and audit them and so on, right? So those are some, I think, key concerns. I think another one that's a key concern is, if you get labeled, for example, the student that gets labeled, you're not even good enough to get a minimum wage job, right? Then essentially it's like, okay, so where do I go? What are my options? Right, so I worry about sort of a loss of agency, a loss of sort of choice, right? Because we're getting labeled increasingly, especially in the job application space, right? There's a labeling that's going on that potentially could be quite harmful. All right, so so the other bit about, okay, so where's the future of work? So if you're trying to get ready and prepare for an environment where we'll be working much more with machines, what are some of the things? So on the one hand, it's people talk about that's what's going to happen is that the jobs in the middle, right? Sort of knowledge work, mid-range management, and so on. All of that's going to go away, right? And because analytics can really make quite good decisions, So this idea that this knowledge work and sort of all the stuff that you've studied, whether you're a doctor or a lawyer, that those things save you, right, from a world of structured work that gets automated, right? The idea is, well, actually there's something else going on because that kind of decision making actually is relatively easy to automate with AI, right? So what isn't easy to automate? So that's, what's the space that is left, right, where you might invest? And I'm not sure that you want to tell your kids to become garbage collectors, but I think it's an interesting perspective to say, that these machines actually sort of don't have a lot of the dexterity and the ability to sort of, do coordinated fine motor work, and especially when there's a lot of uncertainty in the environment, right? So those are some of the things that are likely to stay sort of more human. Anything with social interactions, empathy and emotions, right? There's going to be a lag there, right, until we get to that point. So a lot of care work, community work, education, right? So where there's this need for social interaction. And then, at the end of the day, I think, just want to highlight one thing. So this comes from Egon Zehnder, right? That essentially they're saying the people that we're looking for, right, to lead sort of this new future, they are highly cross-disciplinary, interdisciplinary, right? They have been in multiple locations, multiple industries, and multiple roles. So this idea of, the career ladder, right, is basically saying, you've got to move away from it. So there's sort of another concept called the lattice career, or the career lattice, right? Moving sideways, up and down, right? That's sort of the desirable way to go in order to ward off, right, some of the space, right, that AI is going to encroach on.